Hello my friends, in this video I'm going to show you how easy it is to change the oil and filter on a motorcycle. First off, this process is not going to be the same on every bike but will be very similar. With some basic tools you should be able to perform an oil change yourself and save money on servicing. I like to change the oil on my bike every 2,500 miles. That's a bit excessive, but I am a bit OCD. However, I do recommend changing oil more frequently than the owner's manual suggests, unless you're doing very little miles, in which case once a year should be fine. To start with, consult your owner's manual to find out how much oil you should put in. Normally the manual will give you 3 different amounts for dry fill, oil and filter change, and just an oil change. I always recommend changing the filter when you do an oil change. You should also consult the owner's manual to get the correct torque specs for the oil filter and the sump plug. If you don't have a torque wrench, be very careful tightening the sump plug and filter. You don't want to overdo it. Once you have all your tools prepped and ready, take the bike out for a 10 to 15 minute spin and work it through all the gears to get the oil really hot. As the oil heats up, it becomes thinner and will drain out easier. However, be very careful when removing the sump plug because there is a risk of burning yourself. I followed the typical process when recording this video. However, for speed triple owners, it's important that you put the new oil filter on after you have filled the bike with fresh oil. This is unusual. However, putting the filter on first can create a vacuum within the engine and lead to a low oil pressure warning, which you can see at the end of this video. I had to solve the problem by removing the filter, emptying all the oil from the filter, and then putting it back on the bike. Triumph has updated the servicing process for these bikes as this was a common problem. First thing you want to do is get the bike raised on a paddock stand, or if your bike has one, the rear stand. I tend to leave the engine running until just before I remove the sump plug. This keeps the oil hot and allows it to drain easily. Place an oil pan nearby the bike and release the sump plug with a socket. I then loosen it off a bit further by hand, but not all the way. Because the sump plug on this bike is underneath, I accept it's going to drop into the oil pan. Some bikes have the sump plug on the side of the sump, so you can get away with easing it off without dropping it. I use a rag to carefully unscrew the plug all the way, being very careful not to let the hot oil splash on my hands. Then let all the oil drain out of the bike until there is no more dripping. This can take a while. You can sometimes help it by removing the bike from the stand and rocking it slightly, but I don't think it makes that much difference. For the speed triple, the owner's manual suggests removing the sprocket cover and filter guard. I'm not sure this step is necessary and don't think I would bother a second time round. Remove the oil filter from the bike. I find the oil filter sockets are by far the easiest way of removing filters. There are various different tools available, including a hammer and a screwdriver, but I don't recommend that. Also, when removing Triumph oil filters, quite often the rubber sealing ring will remain on the bike. Make sure you remove this before putting the new filter on. Use this time to clean up around the filter housing. Whilst waiting for the oil to drain, I use this as an opportunity to clean up around the sprocket. If you have any great oil change tips and tricks, please leave a comment below. Before putting the new oil filter on, rub some fresh oil around the rubber seal. This will help it bed in and make it easier to remove in the future. Try and avoid being lazy like me and making a complete mess. You can pour a tiny bit of oil into the oil bottle cap for this job. Put the new filter on the bike and torque it up to spec. Although, as already mentioned, for speed triple owners, do this after you have added the new oil. Apply the new sump washer to the sump plug. It's always recommended to use a fresh washer and they often come with the filters. You can get away with reusing them, but I wouldn't recommend it for something so cheap. Then screw in the sump plug by hand to get it on its way before tightening to spec the torque wrench. Be very careful that you don't over tighten the sump plug. Often the plugs are made of steel and the sump is aluminium. This can easily lead to some expensive damage to the bike if it's cross-threaded or over tightened. Now it's time to fill the bike up with oil. I like to use a measuring jug to get the correct amount of oil. Use a funnel to fill up the bike and clean any oil spill afterwards. Once you've filled the bike with oil, check the oil level either using the sight hole or a dipstick. You may need to allow a few minutes for the oil to find its way down to the bottom of the engine. Be careful not to overfill the engine. Overfilling can lead to excessive oil pressure. Reassemble the bike using the reverse of everything you had to do to take it apart. For most bikes this is likely to be absolutely minimal, although faired bikes may require you to remove the fairings to access the oil filter and sump plug, so allow a bit of extra time for this. Once the bike is back together, it's time to start the engine and check for oil pressure warnings. If you see any warnings after a few seconds, stop the engine immediately and consult the owner's manual or the internet for advice. You don't want to damage the engine. As you can see from my dash, there is a low oil pressure warning. This was due to putting the filter on before filling the bike with oil, which created a vacuum. After removing the filter and emptying it, and then putting it back on, the warning was gone. Allow the bike to run for a few minutes, then shut it down and let it stand for around 5 minutes. Then recheck the oil level and top up if necessary. You should check the oil with the bike off the paddock stand and in an upright position, as the paddock stand may show a false oil level as the bike is raised in a position that is not normal for the bike. Finally, I pour the used oil into an empty oil container. Always dispose of used engine oil responsibly. It's very harmful to the environment and can often be dropped off at a local waste facility. Anyway, that's it folks. Thanks for watching and I hope to catch you in the next one.